So I don't know about you, but I really enjoy music, which maybe seems like an obvious thing, but I'm sure there's some people out there who are like, it doesn't do anything for me. But one of the things I love is when you ask somebody, especially like a teenager. Like I sometimes try to connect with young people over music, and so I'm like, what kind of music do you like? And almost without fail, the response is, oh, I like everything. I just like a little bit of everything, And then you try and push and say, so what's, I used to say, what's on your stereo at home right now, or what's in your CD player. Now it's like, what's on your Spotify playlist? But I'm curious. I want to hear from you guys. Can I get turned down just a little bit? I want to hear from you guys. Let's name your favorite band. No judgment zone here, okay? I'm not going to shame you. The Beatles, okay? Paul Simon. Anybody else? Ren Collective. I'm sorry? Love song. 1970s. I'm not sure if that's a genre, or if it's a specific band, or what, but we'll go with that. Come on, one or two more. This is surprising. I would expect this kind of fits with what I thought. People don't really want to say what kind of music they like for some reason. Robin Mark. Cathedral Quartet. Okay. You're all wrong. As you all know, music peaked in the 90s. No, I think music peaked for everybody around the age that they were like teenagers. When you were in charge of your own music, not what your parents played on the radio, but what you wanted to listen to yourself. And so, for me, that was kind of in the range of the 90s and 2000s. And so there's a certain point in my life where I was working, but I wasn't saving for anything. I should have been saving, but I wasn't saving. And so I had a lot of disposable income, and I disposed of it. A lot of it went into music. And so, those little sleeves where you take the CD out and you put it in there? I eventually got one of those, but before that, I had a big cardboard box. And I would carry this cardboard box, to work and to home, and it was just full of all kinds of music. And, one of my favorites was like 90s dance music. Awesome. Still good. I got a playlist on Spotify if you're interested. Grunge was big at the time, that kind of stuff. But probably one of my favorites was rap. You'll notice the parental advisory explicit content picture there. I don't even think they had that at the time. Because if they did, my parents probably would have said, why are you buying that, right? But I listened to a lot of music that was really not good for me. And so, day after day, I'd be my headphones on or earbuds or whatever it was at the time, listening to some of the worst language and explicit content just pumped directly into my brain. And I mentioned last week, I grew up in the church, but then kind of I had one foot in the world, one foot in the church. I'd be doing Sunday school, but out partying the night before. And around this time in my life, I started to get serious about my faith. I'd always been kind of like a youth group kid or a Sunday school kid, but I would have said at the time that I probably inherited my parents' faith, and it wasn't real for me. But around this time, I started to ask questions like, what do I actually believe? Is this just because my parents gave it to me, or is this because I believe it's true? And I came to the conclusion that it was true. And it was like, okay, I got to get serious about my faith, but every day I've got music pumping into my brain that did not line up with God's message. And I had to come to the conclusion I had to get rid of my music. Now, a really righteous person would have just thrown it all out. But I thought, I can get a little bit of money back for this if I sold it back to some, buy and sell place. And so I did all that. But I got some money back for it. But I made the decision. I said, I got to cut this out of my life. This is not good for me. I've got to cut it out of my life. Have you ever had to give up something because it was keeping you from a goal? For some people, it might be a type of food that you're trying to lose weight and the food just isn't helping you. It might be a hobby that's taking up too much time or money, and it just gets in the way of what you really want to accomplish. Maybe it's an addiction of some kind, and there's lots of different kinds of addictions that can keep you from getting to a goal. what if your goal was to get closer to Jesus? To grow closer to Jesus? Like, what if you made the decision, like I did when I was that age, I want to get serious about my faith? What if that was your goal? What comes to mind that is getting in the way of that? So I'm guessing something just came into mind. When I said that, there's probably something that popped into your mind that's like, that's probably not the best thing for me if I want to get closer to Jesus. St. Clare of Assisi said something along the lines of, what you hold on to shapes what you become. And I think that's true with a lot of different things. Relationships is one of them. Around that same time, there were certain friend groups that I kind of thought, I gotta not spend as much time with them because they're leading me into a place that I shouldn't go in, and I'm not strong enough to pull them towards Jesus. So I just had to say, I'm not going to spend as much time with those people. But what you hold on to shapes what you become. If your heart holds on to the things of the world, you'll be shaped by its values. So for me, when I was that age, and I kind of had one foot in the church, one foot in the world, I was kind of being shaped a little bit of both. But the more I leaned towards the world, the more I looked like the world. The more I leaned towards the church and Jesus, the more I looked like Jesus. And that was my goal. I wanted to be like Jesus. Jesus said in Matthew 6, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So in some ways, I kind of had this treasure of a music collection that wasn't good for me, and it pulled my heart towards it. And so I had to get rid of it. Worship requires an undivided heart. It just does. We're talking about worship this morning. We were singing songs about worship this morning. The Bible says, Jesus said, you can't serve two masters. And so you have to make a decision. What is it that's going to lead you? Today's big idea is that when Jesus holds your heart, the world loses its hold on you. When Jesus holds your heart, the world loses its hold on you. So if you'd asked me, even a year before to give up all my music, I would have been like, no, I don't want to do that. I love my music. It's great. I really enjoy it. But the more Jesus got a hold of me, the less the music had a hold on me. And so I was able at some point to say, I'm just going to get rid of it. When you hold tight to Jesus, you let go of the world. And I want that to be our goal. And so we're doing this series called On the Journey, walking with Jesus on his way to Jerusalem and the cross. And so we're reading through the story of Jesus as he's approaching Jerusalem, as we approach Resurrection Sunday. We're walking along with Jesus, following his story. But as I've been saying, as we've been going through this series, we're all on a journey to eternity, and we need to know Jesus. So it's not just Jesus' journey that we're looking at. We're also asking, where are you on your journey, and how does it tie into that? And the question we're asking is, what are you willing to do to grow closer to Jesus? So for most of the series, we've been looking at the Gospel of Luke. Today, we're also going to be looking at the Gospel of John. John was one of Jesus' closest friends and an eyewitness to everything that happened. And so when Luke was writing his story, he went around and talked to different eyewitnesses. I would not have been surprised if he talked to John, and John gave him some of the info. And so we're going to start in Luke chapter 19, and then we're going to go to John after that, because that's where the story kind of dovetails. We're going to start Luke 19:28, and then we'll flash back a little bit. So Luke 19 says, after telling this story, which makes you ask, what story? And so, last week we talked about Zacchaeus, and the story of Zacchaeus, a wee little man who climbed a tree and was transformed by Jesus. And this is the part that we didn't look at. It's a parable of the 10 servants. And so I don't know, it says, let's go back to verse 11. The crowd was listening to everything Jesus said. And because he was nearing Jerusalem, he told them a story to correct the impression that the kingdom of God would begin right away. And so you can sort of understand, you've got Israel who's under the thumb of Rome, and they're looking at Jesus, and people are talking about him like he's the Messiah. Just a couple weeks ago we talked about the blind man who called out Son of David, and so this idea is coming up. This is the Messiah. The Messiah was supposed to rescue the people. They're starting to think that this is like, okay, earthly kingdom is about to happen. The Messiah is going to come and change what's happening right now on earth. Jesus, as we'll find out, said, I want to talk about a heavenly kingdom first. Eventually the earthly kingdom will come, but right now we're talking about something different. And so he wanted to correct the impression that the kingdom of God would begin right away. He said, a nobleman was called away to a distant empire to be crowned king, and then return. Before he left, he called together 10 of his servants, and divided among them 10 pounds of silver, saying, invest this for me while I'm gone. This part is a bit confusing. But his people hated him. Not the people he gave the money to, but the people who he was going to be king over. Those people hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we do not want him to be our king. After he was crowned king, he returned and called in the servants to whom he had given the money. He wanted to find what their profits were. The first servant reported, Master, I invested your money and I made 10 times the original amount. Amazing return. I think any of us would be happy with that. Well done, the king exclaimed. You are a good servant. You have been faithful with the little I entrusted you. So you will be governor of 10 cities as your reward. The next servant reported, Master, I invested your money and made 5 times the original amount. Well done, the king said. You will be governor over 5 cities. You see here that the king is saying, I'm going to find out what kind of abilities you have and then give you responsibility in accordance with that. Then the third servant brought back only the original amount of money and said, Master, I hid your money and I kept it safe. I was afraid because you're a hard man to deal with, taking what isn't yours and harvesting crops you didn't plant. You wicked servant, the king roared. Other passages tell the same story. You say, you lazy servant. But you wicked servant, your own words condemn you. If you knew that I'm a hard man who takes what isn't mine and harvests crops I didn't plant. And I wonder if the king here is sort of saying that, like, if you knew, or really you thought, that I'm a hard man who takes what isn't mine and harvests crops I didn't plant, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then turning to the others standing nearby, the king ordered, take the money from his servant and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. But Master, they said, he already has 10 pounds. Yes, the king replied, and to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. As for those enemies of mine who didn't want me to be their king, bring them in and execute them right in front of me. Pretty wild story. I mean, there's some stuff in there that makes you ask some questions. And I don't want to spend too much time on it because there's other things that I want to talk about today, but I think the biggest issue here with one servant who did nothing is that he did not trust the character of the king. He believed him to be, almost an evil man, someone who takes what isn't planted, everything that he talked about there. He didn't trust him. And so after telling this story, Jesus went on to Jerusalem, walking ahead of his disciples. That's the direction he's headed. As he came to the towns of Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 disciples ahead. And so that's where we're going to shift from Luke to John, because they're telling the same story, but just from different points of view. And so these are 2 towns, probably hamlets is the word I found this week. It's like a very small town on the outskirts of Jerusalem, kind of like not subdivision, what's the word I'm looking for? No one knows. Anyway, something outside of the town, not the city itself, but, urban sprawl. What's that? Suburb, thank you. That was the word I could not find. It's like a suburb of Jerusalem, and Jesus is coming through this town, and it's like, it's going to be the place where he stays as he does day trips into Jerusalem for the next week or so. So we come to John chapter 12. It says, 6 days before the Passover celebration began, Jesus arrived in Bethany, the home of Lazarus, the man he had raised from the dead. So just a little flashback here. The chapter before this is something we looked at not too long ago, is a story where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Again, there was questions there about the character of Jesus. Eventually they found that Jesus is someone you can trust. Jesus came and he raised Lazarus from the dead. Now this is just the very next chapter, and he's gone somewhere else, and now he's come back. And John is sure to mention that. The reason is, a dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. You might think that would be appropriate. I mean, if someone died in our town here, or our city, and then was brought back to life, do you think people would be kind of interested in the person who did it? Do you think they'd want to find some way to celebrate and honor that person? I think so. A dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. Martha served. Lazarus was among those who ate with him. So again, John's mentioning Lazarus twice here. Like this is all in context of some amazing thing that happened, an amazing miracle. Now, Lazarus had two sisters, Mary and Martha. And there's a couple stories that we know about them. And both times, Martha is the kind of person who is working. She's the kind of person who's an actor, like not like an actress, but someone who's making things happen. She's serving. Mary is the kind of person who sits at Jesus' feet. She's a worshiper. And so we see that Jesus is at this dinner, and Martha is serving. Where's Mary? Next verse says, Mary took a 12-ounce jar. It's about the size of a pop can. 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from essence of nard. Now, I was curious what that was, and it's a bit hard to say for sure. But one theory is, or one explanation of nard is that it comes from like the Himalayan mountains. It comes from I think it was a juniper bush from the Himalayan mountains. So you can imagine why that might be expensive. Expensive perfume made from a plant that comes from miles and miles and miles away. And she anointed Jesus' feet with it, wiping his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with fragrance. I can imagine that being true. Have you ever been in a high school where some teenage boys are using like Axe body spray? And it completely fills like the entire hallway. Now imagine like a pop can full of expensive perfume just completely poured out. This is a fragrance that's gonna permeate. She pours it on Jesus' feet. For the most part, feet are pretty gross. My feet are not in great shape. I know I was in Thailand not too long ago. I got a pedicure because I needed one. They didn't do the nails or anything like that, but just cleaned up the heels and stuff like that. Everywhere Jesus went, he probably walked barefoot or in sandals. This is a time when there's a lot of animals walking along the roads, making deposits. Everyone who walked around, you could just imagine what their feet would have been like. And now she pours her perfume on his feet and then wipes it with her hair. This is an incredibly extravagant and humble act of worship. Now, Mary is the sister of Lazarus. It gets a little confusing because like every other woman in this time period is named Mary. But Mary is the sister of Lazarus. And so he died and came back to life, and she already loved Jesus. Wouldn't she love him all the more now? See him as the Messiah, and she comes and just worships him. John continues on. He says, but Judas Iscariot, the disciple who would soon betray him. You can tell there's no love lost here between John and the disciple who betrayed Jesus. So that perfume was worth a year's wages. It should have been sold and the money given to the poor, which sounds pretty pious. It sounds like, oh yeah, that makes more sense. In some ways, this is just a wasted opportunity here. We could have taken that. We could have helped so many more people with it. Now, I Googled it. A year's wages in the Ottawa Valley average is $65,000. Again, an extravagant amount of worship. But it might have meant even more than that. It might have meant not just her money, but her hopes and dreams as well. See, a lot of people think that this bottle of perfume was something that women would sometimes wear around their neck, but it was probably passed down from their parents as like an inheritance and as a dowry. So this was something that the woman would then give to her husband as he came to make her his wife. And Mary is pouring it out on Jesus' feet. Breaking the bottle open, which would make it now almost worthless, pouring it out of the ground, which makes it, like, to her, no more value to her. Yeah, it's a year's worth of wages, but it probably meant way more than that to Mary. And yet she is willing to give that to Jesus. Not only that, so that's the extravagance, but there's also a humility factor here. I mean, just getting down on your hands and knees is one thing, but especially in that day and age, for a woman to uncover her head and use her hair to wipe a man's feet would have been incredibly humbling. Just an amazing amount of humility. And Judas is basically shaming her for it. I think when you worship with extravagance and humility, there's a good chance people will shame you. It'll make other people uncomfortable. When you love God with all your heart, it's going to make other people feel a little unusual. Judas shames her. Other passages tell us that other people joined in as well. John wants to clarify, though. Judas sounds pious, but he says it's not that he cared for the poor. He was a thief. And since he was in charge of the disciples' money, he often stole some for himself. Now, I was thinking about this. Why would Judas do that? I mean, obviously he's a thief. Maybe it's greed. What's the value to him? You're walking around every day with Jesus and the other disciples, and you're stealing money out of the common pot. What are you going to do with it? It's not like you can go buy yourself something really fancy and nice and, hey, where'd you get the cloak, Judas? Where'd you get the money for that? Like, he has no other income outside of just whatever is given to Jesus for the communal group. I don't think he would have had an opportunity to spend it. And so what I think is going on here is I think Judas was taking money out, kind of putting it away, which shows that he did not fully trust Jesus. He was putting it away, I think, for a rainy day. What if this whole Jesus thing doesn't work out? I'm going to be set up with some money. I'm investing my time in this project, but I'm going to take something back for myself. He didn't completely trust Jesus. Now contrast that to Mary, who completely gives everything she has, all her hopes and dreams, a year's worth of wages that she pours out on his feet because she believes that he is worth it. I don't think it's surprising that this story happened right after the story of the talents, because it's about trusting in the character of the king. Jesus is obviously the king in the story. How much do you trust Jesus? Do you trust him enough to give up everything to follow him? Do you trust him enough to give him your entire heart and everything that goes along with it? Jesus replied, "Leave her alone." Judas is shaming her. Maybe some others were involved as well. Jesus says, "Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial." Now, I don't know for sure if she realized that. I don't know for sure that she came and said, Jesus is talking about dying, so I'm going to prepare his body for burial. Maybe it was the Holy Spirit who encouraged her to do it and said, this is an appropriate thing to do. And Jesus is saying, she may not even have known it, but this was in preparation for my burial. The way I understand it is that in those days when someone died, they would be covered with some kind of perfume. It was kind of like an embalming process, probably something to take care of aromas, that sort of thing. But she's just worshiping Jesus, preparing for what is to come. And then Jesus finishes by saying, "You'll always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Now, he's not saying that we're not supposed to look after the poor. Obviously, that's something we're supposed to do. But at this time, it was appropriate to show him that kind of worship. And I would say it is appropriate at any time to show extravagant worship to Jesus. So as we're going from here today, you need to know that letting go of the world frees you to worship fully. Again, you can't serve two masters. You can't have one foot in the church worshiping Jesus and one foot worshiping the world. You need to let go of the world to free you up to worship Jesus. Romans 12:1 says, "Dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him." If you know anything about the sacrificial system, it was an animal that they would put up on the altar and it would burn up. I've heard people say the problem with a living sacrifice is it wants to get off the altar whenever it gets hot. What Paul's saying here is that you need to give yourself completely to God. A living sacrifice to say, whatever you want to do, I'm on board with it. I'm following you. This is truly the way to worship Him. True worship isn't about songs or moments. We were fortunate enough to be able to go to a worship concert this week. Pat Barrett was the worship leader. And it was a great time. It was amazing. He's a great musician. A crowd full of people. I would say probably 800 to 1,000 people, all lifting up hands in worship. You can get caught up in the moment with that. But true worship isn't just about the moment. I mean, I think there was true worship going on there, but it's not just about fog machines and lights and trying to generate that. It's about surrender. When you loosen your grip on the temporary, you can give your whole self to God. When you let go of the world, you can give yourself completely to worship Jesus. What you're holding on to actually has a hold on you. So I want you to identify what you're holding on to. What is it that has a grip on you? When I said earlier, what's the thing that's holding you back from following Jesus with your whole self? What is that? And how do you get that out of your life? Or at least put it in an appropriate place in your life so that you can worship Jesus? What am I reluctant to release? Ask God to reveal anything that you're clinging to more than Him. What is one thing you need to surrender to so that Jesus can have your whole heart? What would happen if you surrendered that today? Better worship, you can come back up.